David Malott is with Kohn Pedersen Fox in New York, the director of design. He's worked on many projects, including Shanghai World Financial Center across the street. Welcome to Shanghai, but you've been here many times before.
That's right.
We're taking a technical tour of the Shanghai World Financial Center today, and as we go through the building, if you were giving a technical tour of that building, what kind of features would you point out?
I think it's definitely the mix of uses and how they relate to the form of the building. So that tower is a tapering tower. So one has to think about the form of the tower and how it relates to the uses on the inside. So the office space is square, large floor plate. So this is ideally suited to the tenants in the office. And as the building tapers, the dimensions become smaller on the inside. And that's where we locate the hotel. And finally, the building tapers to a line at the very top, which is the observation deck. So I think moving through the form, the sculptural form of the tower, but realizing how it influences and informs the spaces on the inside of the building is really the key to understanding that project.
Some of the other projects you have going on, one of the news headlines out of here is the Ping An Financial Center in Shenzhen, which, what's the status on that project right now?
So the project is finally above ground, so we're about 3 stories tall right now, so that means we have another 115 to go.
As we talk about amazing spaces within buildings, and that's a favorite topic of ours, the places you go that are like nowhere else on earth, Shanghai World Financial Center is certainly one. Ping An rather, at the top under the dome. Is that still being designed, and what all's going on underneath that dome structure?
Right, so the original brief for that building was pure office, from the bottom up to the top, and we discussed with the client this idea of wanting to open the building to the public, to make it a public building. And that's where the idea for the dome came about. So if you think about that building, and it does have some reference to, say, the Art Deco buildings in New York. There's a great tradition on the tops of those buildings for dining experiences. If you think about Rockefeller Center and the Rainbow Room, or the windows on the old World Trade Center, that kind of sort of glamorous or fantastic experience occurring at the top of the tower. So the idea is within that dome, it's completely right now just a open cathedral-like space. Now what goes inside it exactly is still going to be determined from now. So it still hasn't quite been decided. So we're just setting up the space, if you would, for something to go inside, which could be quite a unique experience. Below that dome will be more of our standard observation deck experience. And then how to complement that with another activity is something that we're considering now.
Mm-hmm. And this philosophy of getting people to go into and through an entire building certainly is a philosophy of this age, because it didn't used to be. And it's something that I've heard Gene and Bill mention a lot, and it's really a philosophy of your firm, isn't it? It's something that you actively go out and solicit.
Correct.
And your clients, right?
Right. So it's we look for clients who are interested not just in doing the building, but in doing urbanism. How the building fits into the public realm, how the building can participate. Bill Pedersen is always talking about the participation of the building in the urban realm, and it's both in terms of its form and how it might respond to different site forces within the city, but within the building itself and how to open it up to the public. And certainly we always push and try to steer our clients into that direction, to create public spaces within the building. The challenge is always one of economics, and so when we do this, we can't say necessarily just push it for a certain social agenda. While that might be very important, we have to think about how it can also make sense financially for the client, and I think that's the real trick, is how to accomplish it in a way that is a win-win for everybody.
One of the news headlines to come out of this conference, a little one maybe, but significant nonetheless, is that the height of the building is being revised upward because there's some design changes going on at the top, not with the rest of the building, but the top. What's being considered and what's being done there?
Okay, so at the top of Ping An, we've always had a spire, because the spire just felt like the only way really to resolve that particular form. So with the spire, there's a technical challenges. It's called galloping. So if the wind starts to move the spire, rock it back and forth, that movement can begin to accelerate upon itself, and it can whip, progressively get worse. Now, so inside that spire, we've designed a damper specific to the spire itself to counteract that movement. But the damper itself adds weight. It adds a bit of complexity. There's the maintenance, the serviceability of the damper long term, and so we decided to revisit the concept. So rather than having a damper, to look at an aerodynamic solution, an aerodynamic damping solution for the spire. So that means opening it up. So rather than a solid spire, it becomes more of a perforated spire that lets the wind pass through. And in doing so, it raised the possibility that could we actually extend the height of the spire using the same amount of material, because now it becomes a more efficient spire. So it's not a definite, I'll tell you that, but it's a possibility that, once we looked at a different kind of solution, this opportunity came about.
The Chow Tai Fook Center in Guangzhou is another project that you're working on, and that's what's the height figure on that now?
I believe 550.
Okay.
550, 560.
And give us a status report on how that's going.
So that project is moving extremely quickly. So we started that after Ping An. So I think the design started about 2.5 years ago. And the excavation started almost 3 to 6 months, I'll say 6 months after we commenced the design.
Can you describe the design for us? Describe the building and tell us what it's about, what else is going on there.
So it's like Shanghai World Financial Center. It's a mix of uses. So we have office at the base, a hotel at the top. This one also has the addition of residences below the hotel. So between the office and the hotel is a residential building. So similar to Shanghai Financial Center, there was a need to taper the building. So the building has to get progressively smaller so that the interior spaces are tailored to the different needs: office, residential, hotel. If Shanghai Financial Center is an analog taper, if you will, it's a continuous taper, Chow Tai Fook is a digital taper, so it's more of a series of incremental step backs which create this appearance of a chiseled shape.
How does the building interact with other buildings? Because there's the TV tower and another super tall in town, and how does all of that interact?
Right. Interesting, the original design, or the original master plan for that area of Guangzhou called for twin towers. So there's the Wilkinson Air Project, which is the Guangzhou West. So Guangzhou East was originally intended to be a similar tower, but I think as things progressed, both the government and the client wanted a different kind of building. So rather than the triangular form, we started with the square form. But these setbacks, or the tapers which I mentioned, actually correlate or index themselves to the height of the surrounding buildings. So I think one of the setbacks actually occurs at the level of the Guangzhou East Tower, and then the top of Guangzhou West, or Chow Tai Fook Center, slopes up and sort of directs the face of the building to the TV tower across the river. So in that way, it has that urban response in terms of its setbacks and indexing to other buildings, creating a directionality to the building at its top.
I think one of the neat things that I've seen in a lot of places in China, including here in Shanghai, is the fact that you have so much open air and sight distance between buildings, and they're not concealed by other buildings, so you get the full effect, the full visual effect of the height of the building. And in Guangzhou, you've got this long park segment with the TV tower at one end, and looked like a lot of great opportunities just for you to be so visible. How does that enter into the equation of design?
I think it certainly does push buildings into wanting to be more sculptural, or for the curtain walls to be more visually appealing. I think especially if you do something of that size, that's that highly exposed. Certainly, you feel the obligation, I think, for it to be a beautiful building. But at the same time, it poses a lot of challenges, because suddenly, these towers do become very isolated. And the way in China with the zoning code and the setbacks and all these requirements, it pulls the buildings away from the street edges. So we lose that urban fabric that we're accustomed to, say, in New York or Chicago, of continuous street walls. And that, for me, is the biggest challenge working in China, is what to do at the bottoms of these towers, and how to collect the people into it, how to connect to the neighbor when we're faced with these divisions created by the zoning. So it's not something necessarily within our control, but how do we make the most of it?
going to Hong Kong later this week and to Shenzhen, and the connection between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. You have mentioned one of the great things about tall buildings in China is that they connect directly in with the rail system. Mm-hmm. And I heard you mention something about a new rail system between Hong Kong and Shenzhen and how the buildings interact with that. Mm-hmm. How does that work?
So this is, I think, very exciting development, and certainly it should be thought of in parallel with tall building development. So it's not just isolated icons that are marking the city centers, but seeing how this can all be integrated together with mass transit. So I think Hong Kong really is a leader in that. When they developed the new airport, they thought about building up density on these stations from the Airport Express to Central Station. So Cesar Pelli's IFC2 is one example, and our ICC project in Kowloon being another. Now, next to ICC, they're building the XRL, which is the new high-speed rail that will go into mainland China. And coincidentally, the first stop is in Shenzhen, about 3 blocks from Ping An Finance Center. And so one can go on this XRL train to Shenzhen in 14 minutes and be at Ping An. And it's all connected below grade. Go another 30 minutes and you're in Guangzhou near the CTBUH Center. So one begins to think of a string of tall buildings that are connected by public infrastructure. And then the tall building begins to make sense.
And really, until the Kowloon project, I don't know that we ever really thought of tall buildings as also being transportation terminals.
Yes, I think that's also, I mentioned that the public component of the building is something that tall buildings should aspire to. The other component is exactly this, where the tall building should really be conceived as part of a city's infrastructure. So for me, the tall building really only makes sense, is only justifiable when one gets a certain density and then it's serviced by public transportation. So it becomes part of the city's vertical infrastructure, and having that connection to be as seamless as possible is important. And I think ICC in particular does that quite well, where literally from the train station one walks through the retail mall and enters the dragon tail of that tower. This is an atrium that peels away from the tower, so the tower literally informally expresses the connection between the tall tower and the rail station.
News headline to come out of China here recently that everyone is talking about is the Broad Group and their 838-meter tower plans to erect such a tower in 90 days. Mm-hmm. Have you looked at any of their work, and what observations do you have?
I certainly think it's within the realm of possibility that if you did prefabrication and did it correctly, that the construction time of a building like that is possible. What I just want to make sure is that they don't shortcut the design time necessary to do that. So one may gain savings in construction time, but it'd probably take more time to design, I think, to make sure to get it absolutely correct.
And one of the fears is that when you're mass producing a building like that, or fabricating, that you're losing customization, but someone else here called it mass customization. Mm-hmm. So explain that. You're not really losing that dimension of design.
Correct. And in many ways, the buildings that we do have this mass customization aspect to it. I think both the steel work, the form work, the curtain panels. There's a lot of benefit to repetition and standardization. Of course, you don't want to lose any opportunities for form or for sculpting the building. But whenever you do those moves, you tend to think about them as mass customization. So, for example, Shanghai Financial Center, as it tapers, each panel along the taper is a form of mass customization. So it's one panel that's being transformed or customized as it goes up. So I think it's a good concept, and I actually see it as something that we'll do more and more of in tall buildings. The idea of prefabricating entire components, that each one can be slightly customized or adapted, lifted up into place. I think it's a fabulous idea. But again, it's the design time that should go into the building to make sure you get it right. Because with the building, each building it's site specific. The wind conditions for each building are different. The solar conditions for each building are different. So one cannot replicate the same building in many different locations around the world and do so responsibly. So rather than cloning, I guess it's this idea of how do you take the basic DNA of that building block and beginning to adapt it to its site-specific requirements.
What are the spectacular places and buildings?
Okay, so it's where the public can experience the building, and in many ways where the public can experience the other public experiencing the building. So it's the social aspect of some of these spaces that we can create. Shanghai Financial Center, I think, being a great example where there's the portal at the top of the building. One can move around the entire portal, and so one can be at that observation bridge at the top, but actually look down and see the building that you're contained within. It's a very novel experience. So if you think of typically an observation deck, you're just looking out at the view, but you don't actually see the building that you're inside. So I think the idea of using buildings a little bit more spatially is very dramatic, and people can begin to enjoy it. So Ping An, we're opening the entire top of the building, the dome of the building to the public. King Key, we talked about as another good example that has a very nice spatial experience at the top. So there's something about revealing the building. So whether it's the dome on Ping An or the vaulted space on King Key, or the portal on SWFC, sort of opening it up, people begin to sense the building, makes it much more exciting.
David Malott, thanks for coming to see us in Shanghai.